Jeff, you wrote an article here, 47 Explains Much, and you wrote it on February 12th at Alhambra Partners. And of course, I can't help but think of one of my all-time favorite, most delightful books, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and the life, the universe, everything, the ultimate meaning of life. And there's a story where a couple of guys built a computer, Deep Thought, and they asked him, can you tell us what's the meaning of life, the ultimate question? And the computer said, yeah, it's tricky, but I can do it. How much time? 7.5 million years. So they're very upset about that, but they created an entire priesthood to keep the flame going, right? And so 7.5 million years, two guys are waiting there. The computer wakes up and he says, I've got an answer for you. And they're so excited. The computer says, you're not going to like it though. Tell us. You're not going to like it. And the life, the universe, the ultimate issues of life, the number 42. And of course, just pure comedy. I love it. I love it. And so I was hoping that this is what this is about. Is this book 6 to The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? 47.
I think that would probably have been a better outcome, but no, it's about jobless claims, and it's actually up to 48 now.
Right.
Which is, for the last 48 weeks, jobless claims have been above what would have been before last year record levels. In fact, no single week at any point in history had ever been 700,000. And over the last 48 weeks, we've never been less than 700. In fact, the lowest point was 711,000 in November.
Jeff, can you see this graph I'm showing here?
Yep.
The initial jobless claims. I think that's just a great visual that it's off the charts, right?
Compared to... I didn't, when I created the chart, and what we're looking at here is what I call excess claims, which is the amount of, because there's always some amount of jobless claims, even in the best economies. There's usually a couple 100,000 because there's people moving, there's people losing jobs, people moving back and forth, there's frictions in the labor market. So what we really are interested in when we're talking about recessions in the business cycle is how many excess claims there are above the pre-crisis or the pre-recession period. And so when we compare the largest recessions of the last, of the post-war era, the last 80 years, that's 1981, 82, 2008, 2009, and 2020, we're not even in the same league as what used to be the worst. We're still well above the worst.
And then, so the question I suppose should be asked is, why is anybody surprised if consumers, American consumers, are not too happy? Because that's what the results were from a recent University of Michigan survey. And here I'm quoting you from the article. I think it's from a media here, but quote, more surprising was the finding that consumers, despite the expected passage of a massive stimulus bill, viewed prospects for the national economy less favorably in early February than last month. As you said, surprising to whom? We're on week 48.
Yeah, that was actually from the University of Michigan's press release. Okay. So surprising to the University of Michigan economists, certainly, and probably to most people because, government payment stimulus. Why wouldn't people think of the future positively if Uncle Sam's going to loosen the purse strings more than the trillions that had already done the previous year? It sounds terrific. It sounds awesome. I mean, we're throwing a party in Robin Hood.
Well, it goes back to the permanent income hypothesis, right? People are not as dumb as I guess we are assumed to be. They know that the 600 stimulus check is a one-time deal. The Congress has had a hard enough time passing that, or is it 1,600? Not that it matters because it's just not enough. It's not a continuous 1,600. And I guess the point you're making here in this article, Jeff, is whether or not the government can continue to kind of buy their way towards a recovery.
Well, that's right. I mean, quite naturally, you would associate, positive sentiment with permanent income, with a job, right? Because that's going to allow you to live the life the way that you've come to expect, or even, it allows you to think ahead and think, well, I'll get a better job. I can keep progressing as people normally do. If you think that the labor market is awful, where even if you're still employed, you realize that, man, things are really bad out there, then it doesn't matter that the government comes along and says, periodically, I'm going to give you a check and it's going to be based on a whole bunch of political considerations. Are you going to base your spending patterns, your debt patterns, all of your consumer patterns on the whims of Congress? Are you going to allow Janet Yellen to set for you your proclivities and incentives for spending? No, you're not. You're not going to react as much to that. You might react favorably in the short run, but you're going to realize at the end of the day, what matters most, what only matters is jobs, labor. And really, it's, we're in February of 2021. We're coming up on 1 year now. So perceptions, these negative perceptions of the labor market, maybe in last spring and last summer, you would thought, well, yeah, it's really bad, but it's going to get better. We're reopening the economy. It sounds like things are going to move pretty quickly toward normal. So the government's spending a lot of money. We'll think favorably about everything because it seems like things can get really better. But here in February 2021, and the labor market's still as bad as it has ever been since the 1930s, you can understand why people would take a dim view. Even after being gifted $600 from Uncle Sam, it doesn't really change your perception of the economy. It doesn't really change what you're going to do based on how you're going to spend because, well, it's good that you got the $600 and maybe you could pay rent this month. It doesn't change what happens next month or the month after that. You really want to be beholden to congressional authority when you get your next 600? No, it does not replace, and it cannot replace the labor market and jobs.
But members of our audience right now, Jeff, they may be saying, hold on a minute. Earlier this week, I did hear really good news about the American consumer in the form of retail sales. And I'm going to read out.
Retail sales absolutely exploded. Well, maybe they exploded higher in January. We're not really sure. Seasonally adjusted, it was, I think, a 5% monthly gain, which is absolutely astronomical. But the seasonal adjustments didn't really agree with the non-seasonal adjustments. And the unadjusted data was only about 6% higher than January of 2020, which, given where we are, that's not really all that robust. So, but either way, retail sales had been declining since last September, which was a reflection of, hey, the last round of stimulus started to get spent and run out. The labor market had stopped improving. And so for the last quarter of last year, consumer spending went in reverse. And the revised figures for December showed that the drop in December was pretty sharp. So over the last quarter, consumers spent less because unemployment benefits were running out. The labor market wasn't improving. And so it made sense that they would spend less.
Jeff, I think you've buried the lead here. And that was that whole seasonally adjusted and not seasonally adjusted part of the story. Now, what I was going to do, I was going to read out a few comments from very well-respected journals of finance, such as the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal. And I was going to tell you that nowhere in there do they talk about not seasonally adjusted or seasonally adjusted like you do. And you bring to our attention a discrepancy, an unusual adjustment. What can you tell the audience that it's somewhat unusual, this seasonal adjustment?
Usually seasonal adjustments, it's not uncommon to find seasonally adjusted numbers to disagree a little bit with the unadjusted numbers because, the number of weekends, where a holiday falls, for example, on a calendar. Easter is a particularly notoriously difficult one. Some years it's in March, some years it's in April. That changes spending patterns and changes the seasonal adjusting. So those things are normal. We know that they're there. But there really isn't an apparent reason why the seasonally adjusted figure would be so much larger, so much bigger than the unadjusted figure for January of 2021. The nearest I can come up with is that New Year's happened to fall on a Friday, which meant that the first weekend of January was kind of different than it had been in the year before. And that's not really a plausible explanation. So I don't really know why there was such a large seasonal adjustment in January. There were the same number of weekends. Weekends are always a big factor. Consumers like to spend on weekends and that kind of a thing. So there's really no identifiable reason to me why the seasonally adjusted number had gone so far. And it may be just, it could be any number of reasons.
But maybe you were concerned that it's not real, sustainable. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but to me, I think it just seems suspicious. Not suspicious. Let's hold back judgment for a couple more months.
Well, what they're really saying is that when we look at a typical January, there was much more spending in this January than a typical January. That's all really seasonal adjustments are, is comparing this current one to what is typically happens in other months and other months, same months of each calendar, and saying, is it a lot more? Is it a lot less? Is it about the normal? What do we? And so what they're really saying is that, look, this January there was more spending than last January, and quite a bit more spending. Now, how much more? That'll be we'll have to work that out over the months ahead to see if there is an adjustment give back in February, which is probably pretty likely. And so that will complicate our analysis of what happened in February after the $600 payments wear off. Is it the payments wearing off if there's a drop in February? It makes it much more complicated to look at apples to apples.
Well, I think the most important part I want the audience to keep in mind here is that, honestly, I looked through a lot of papers that were writing about retail sales. Nowhere else was it brought up, what Jeff just talked about. I think that's why you're all listening to this show. So that's wonderful. Jeff, I had a great time. Let's do this again next week.